June of 1972 in Carroll County was much like any other in the state of Maryland. Work, life, and play continued as usual for the citizens of the county, as the end of school, as well as the beginning of summer, was celebrated. Hurricane season had begun on June 1st, and while subtropical storm Alpha had caused the southern coast of the United States some flooding, beach erosion and downed trees and power lines, Maryland had remained unscathed. On June 14th, a tropical depression was spawned over the Yucatan Peninsula, and on June 19th, Hurricane Agnes made landfall in Florida. Weakened after her path inland, Agnes re-strengthened into a tropical storm over the Atlantic and once again made landfall in New York, but not before she left her mark on Maryland, and more specifically, Carroll County. The amount of rain brought by Agnes to Carroll was comparable only to totals in Pennsylvania and New York, and the severe local flooding caused an estimated $10 million in damage to the county. Roads, bridges, and rail lines were destroyed, and necessary services such as power, water, sewer, and telephone were unavailable for days as the water receded. This is when the people of our community joined together to grasp what had happened and began working together to move forward.
We moved to Union Bridge, a couple of houses up the street back in 1970 in June, right after I graduated from high school, but I've been working here since I was 13 years old. My father bought the business back in 1968, and it's a family business. We've been here ever since, so we're about 53 or 54 years in this business right now, this area.
Been in the area all my life. Grew up over outside of Linwood there along Route 75. And lived there from the time I was 6 years old, 1958, we moved there. So we moved right into the flood zone. Didn't know it at the time, or I didn't know it at the time, I was a kid. In the summer of 70, I went to work for Carroll County as summer help, out on inspections on subdivisions that were being built. And I worked there summer of 70, summer of 71, then I graduated from Frederick Community College in 72, and then went full-time with the county in June of 72, June 12th of 72. As far as the county goes, I don't know how much preparation time they had. And again, things were quite different then than what they are now with the number of people the county had, the equipment they had. It just didn't have it in those days. So there probably wasn't, in my guess, there probably wasn't a lot of preparation because they just didn't have the ability and maybe even the forecast, the knowledge of what was going on as what we live with today, that we're very familiar with today. You have weeks notice of the storms brewing in the Atlantic, and they make these projections where they're going to go, and you can follow them for a week, 2 weeks at a time. It just wasn't quite that way in 1970.
That morning it started raining, and no one knew. They kept saying it was going to rain throughout the day, and of course people who lived in Union Bridge here and myself, we've never experienced anything like that. So during the day, it was raining, but like I say, that evening it was probably within an hour and a half, 2 hours is when it was when it actually came out of the banks, and then it just flooded because we actually got all the runoff, from like New Windsor, McKinstry's Mill, Westminster. The water was flowing downstream, and the current was just that heavy. It was kind of devastating for everybody here because no one understood, exactly what the pressure of the water would do. My father and I left here to go to Uniontown for an accident. We were only gone probably about an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes. And when we left, we drove through water when we left town. And we got back here, water was going across the hood of the tow truck. And we had a Ford tow truck at the time, and water was running across the hood of the truck when we came back through town.
When the storm actually hit, the worst part of it, if I remember, it kind of came through the night, and I was at home. And I remember spending the evening kind of back and forth between the neighbors' houses. Of course, we could no longer travel the road in front of our house, the old Route 75, because it was underwater. I was in the basement, and the water was up on the basement windows at that point, and I was carrying the items up, and the basement windows broke in. And needless to say, the water followed me up the steps getting out of the basement. The immensity of it, just stand there in the yard and look at that water, and as far as you could see across to the railroad track, and on the other side was water. And it just was really mind-boggling. We had seen high waters there at the house before. I think there was maybe in '68, because I know I have my driver's license, and I'd gotten them in '68. And I think there was a flood come through that summer while the school year was out. Wasn't near as bad, needless to say. It did get up high enough, it was flooded over the old road in front of my father's house. But it didn't get, it was probably 3, 4, maybe 5 feet less than what it was during Agnes. The water out all the way up to the very front of our house. And I think you may have a picture of the water after it went down some from over on the new Route 75 at the time. And I'm not sure, I guess it was the following day then that we laid boards across the ditch line between Route 75 and the red farmhouse, McComas' farmhouse. We've laid planking across that ditch line because the water was flowing through on that side of the road. And I walked out and they picked me up and I went into work.
That day of the flood, I think we had about between 8 and 9 inches of rain that afternoon, and the waters came up, and there was hardly enough time for anybody to move anything because the water came up so fast. It was the 100-year flood. No one expected it. So it was something that was very new to everybody in the community. As far as right through here, water went all the way as high as anybody's seen for a long time. It went right to the railroad track right here on Main Street, covered the railroad track. Right here where I'm sitting, if you look at the top of the doorway, there was 8 foot of water right here, and I'd be sitting in 8 foot of water right now. There was a couple of vehicles that got washed away that were downstream like a mile and a half. So it's just something we hope we never see again, that much water at one time.
At that time, the highway system, or the highway department, was totally different than what you find today. Today, there's all different bureaus and bureau chiefs, and you got a director at the top, and then deputy directors, and then bureau chiefs. At that time, there was one guy. He was the engineer for the county, and he managed everything. And actually, he did everything. He was an engineer, he surveyed, he handled the inspections, he handled maintenance. Everything fell under him, and there was no individual party in between. He managed the road crews, he managed the survey crew, and actually did the surveying himself. So it was just an entirely different operation. So when you needed somebody, me being out on inspections, it didn't mean anything. I went out myself and the instrument man on the survey crew and a truck driver for roads. And our job for about the next week was barricading roads. And it became my introduction to just how much damage there was around over the county, because we saw a lot of it. There was just so many bridges and so many small structures washed out, roadways washed out, ditch lines washed out, pavement washed away. And particularly in the South Carroll area, Piney Run had not been built yet. And the devastation below what is the breast of Piney Run was just just amazing. The roads were gone. The stream ran where the road was, and some places the road was buried by debris 3, 4, 5 foot deep, and other places the road was gone 3 or 4 foot deep. And it really tore things up down through there.
We had family right across the street. They were going to stay in their house, and finally the water got so high that the fire department had to rescue them with a boat and bring them out. And another family down off of George Street was the same way. Canary Lane and George Street, they thought they were going to stay in their house, and the fire company had to rescue them with a boat also. And that was this end of Union Bridge, but the south side of town where the Frederick and Carroll County line is, a bridge there that goes over Sam's Creek, tractor trailer was coming in the road that night, and the bridge collapsed with the tractor trailer. The tractor went down over the bridge. The driver was floating away, and he grabbed onto a tree, And the fire department had to go and rescue him with also a boat because a little bit longer, I mean, the water kept on rising and he probably would have drowned, but and then that bridge was out of service for about 6 or 8 months, so they got a new bridge put in. Right behind us was a trucking company, Mitchell Transport, and they had a tractor trailer sitting there with 25 ton of sand on it, and it washed that tractor trailer down through the pasture back there, probably about 500 or 600 yards down into the field, just by the force of the water. You know, and we've tried to, since that, tried to educate people that the force of the water is very damaging. Tried to keep them so they don't go into the water after a flood because it could wash them away. And of course, you don't know what the roadway is under the water. The road could be washed out and you don't really know it.
The first thing, like I say, you always have to do is make things safe. Try to prevent people from being their own worst enemy and driving into the open holes. And there was, you know, the first couple of days was spent doing those type of things, just barricading roads. And but right along with that, we had situations where people were trapped. There was no way out. So they were the first place you tackle. And you go in and start making whatever emergency repairs that you could. Detour, you know, that was a mess. And the fire companies come in and neighbors come in, and I know the National Guard, I believe, come in places and helped out. But it was just, you know, the typical small county. I don't know what we had, maybe 70,000, 80,000 population at the time. And everybody in the community knows everybody, and everybody just helped each other out, the way it is in Carroll County. And still kind of that way today, even though we've changed a good bit.
Probably about 12 to 14 hours before it receded, it went back into the banks. And then, of course, at that time, it was time to start the cleanup project. And we were very fortunate that everyone in town, you know, that wasn't affected by the flood tried to help everybody that was affected by the flood. So there was a lot of cleanup, a lot of hauling of debris, a lot of hauling of people's personal properties that were in their houses. Myers's Super Thrift across the street, they had like 5 foot of water inside the building, so everything inside the store had to be taken out and hauled away to the landfill because they couldn't use it. Once you got everything out of the debris out of the way of scraping up the mud, it was actually just using scrapers and scoop shovels scraping the mud out because you couldn't wash it. It was like an inch and a half thick, and it was just so greasy you had to be very careful. You could fall down and injure yourself. That was the worst thing. It was just like, it was worse than working in a barnyard anywhere. It was just so greasy. The fire department kept some people at the fire hall on cots and stuff because they had nowhere to go, fed them there, and there's different families in the town of Union Bridge that, you know, during the process of trying to get cleaned up, there were people in town that brought people lunches and dinners, you know, while we were cleaning up. So it was a good effort by everybody in town to try to, you know, in the cleanup process that took probably about 2 weeks, or guess, you know, to get all the mud cleaned up. And even today, every now and then you might hit on something and you still have mud coming out from, you know, back at that time.
You know, it was just overwhelming to see how much damage there was, and you kind of stand there and look at it and say, where do you start? What do we do next? How are we ever going to get this done with what we have? But you just, each situation, you just address it as it came and try to set a priority to it. You know, we always try to run with fire departments and stuff if they had fires, if they had emergencies, not only just in this storm, but in any storm, you know, or a snowstorm or whatever. We always respond with them if they need the help. And, you know, keeping all that going, and the flood, during the flooding, you know, getting their equipment in and out to help solve situations. Just the scope of it becomes mind-boggling. So many of the structures were old structures, and many of them were wooden structures that just literally picked up and floated away during the storm. And when you go to put them back, the conditions that you had to design them with in the 70s was much different when they were, well, some of them were put in 100 years before. We made an effort to clear debris as soon as they accumulated under structures. We actually come up and was able to get a bridge crew going, and that wasn't to go out and build structures, but to maintain them. And they spent their entire year, other than snow removal or other emergencies, just going around maintaining bridges, keeping it clean, keeping the brush cut away from them, keeping the waterways open, keeping, you know, the debris and stuff that comes downstream all the time. I remember one of the worst areas for talking about debris was Starner's Dam. There was so much stuff that came down out of Pennsylvania and came in under Starner's Dam Bridge that we spent a lot of time up there and with chainsaws, down in the floodplain, down in the waterway almost itself, clearing and cutting up and moving out.
Agnes was in 72, 75 was Eloise. Eloise was not near as bad. I think at Eloise we had about, instead of 8 foot, we had about almost 5 foot of water here in the station. And then, that was like 2 floods within several years, and my dad was to the point at that time he thought about just saying the heck with it and moving out, but it was like, everything you had, he had washed away. So, and everybody in the community and everything, like the people in the town and everybody says, you've been here for a long time, we don't want you to leave. And that was in 75, and here it is it's 2022 and we're still operating in the same place. But it's something that we've learned to deal with. We have now that, my brother and I, and we have, when the water's coming up, it's raining, we look at the stream, we know how long it's going to be or about, and we put plywood on the lift, we put the toolboxes on the lift, raise them up in the air, get our belongings there, and we move the customers' vehicles out. And it's just something you learn to deal with. They talk about fixing the stream and fixing the flooding, but a lot of this was man-made, because I've been here long enough, nobody understands that back behind us, Mitchell Transport, when that was built, there was a lot of dirt hauled in there to raise their elevation. Myers' store over here, which is flood zone now, from the corner here at this building to the corner of their building, they're 5 foot higher than we are. And at one time, this was all flat and level through here. So when of course you couldn't do that now in the flood zone, but back in the 60s and the 70s, no one thought about that. So they elevated so they could keep from being in the flood. And so we've kind of like man-made our own little lake around here. So, the water comes up where it used to flow through, it doesn't flow through anymore. It has to go somewhere, so it goes around those properties and then just floods. So it's something you have to learn to deal with.
I think the big boom that came out of it for the county was how much we were able to replace and get new structures built in this county. Those 40, and I think, like I say, 3 years later, we lost an additional 30 on top of the 40 we lost 3 years before. It just put this county in really good footing for structures, where you hear reports on TV, and every year they talk about because everybody goes through a 2-year bridge cycle of having them inspected, and it's always come out insufficient bridges and bad bridges and all that, and how much it's going to cost billions of dollars across the country. We were way ahead of the curve on that after those 2 floods of replacing bad structures and getting things up to par. Really put us ahead in a lot of the country, a lot of the rest of the country.
In the 50 years since Agnes struck the East Coast, Carroll County has worked to make its residents safer from floods. Carroll County has adopted stormwater management regulations that require facilities like the Langdon and Willow Pond facilities. Carroll County has built flood control structures like Piney Run Dam, and Carroll County has restored streams in areas like Mayberry and Woodside. Another storm like Agnes could come at any time, and as we see more frequent and more intense storms, we must remain vigilant. But we are far better prepared when Carroll County is hit with future disasters. We will continue to protect our residents, their property, and the natural and built environment from hazards through public outreach, mitigation, preparedness, and resiliency.